If you know about a minister that was the primary figure in forming AA's original board of trustees, who would become the custodians of AA services worldwide, I'm thinking of Willard S. Richardson, a friend and associate of the Rockefellers. In 1937, we called upon Mr. Richardson to help us find a lot of money for AA, and said he'd help us find ourselves, largely because of his kindness and understanding, his devotion to work, and AA's board of trustees formed. The writing of the big book was begun. His was the kind of giving that had no price tag on it. What are 7,000 groups today? Oh, Uncle Dick Richardson, a clergy only God could possibly know. Wow, can we ever pay our debt back to the clergy? Absolutely. Without it, we would not be here today again. Skip the next couple sentences. It talks about another clergy guy, a guy named Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick. He says Dr. Fosdick became the first man of religion ever to stand up right before the general public and give us a big pat on the back. I have often wondered how much this generous act required of his understanding, love, and sheer nerve. Go over to page 178. It goes on to say, when I think how America would have been rocked with mirth is gaiety, jovial, accompanied by laughter, amusement, or much laughter. Had been rocked with mirth if 2 or 3 of AAs had turned up, plastered on the spotlight of the famous dinner. Clergyman Fosdick had gone far out on a limb. We shall always remember that. Surely by hundreds and probably thousands, our friends in the clergy have continued to go out on a limb. They install meetings in the basement social halls, never interfering with our affairs. They sit in the back rows, explaining that they have come to AA to learn. When Sunday arrives, they preach sermons about us. They send us prospects and marvel at their progress. We sometimes ask them to speak to us. They invariably apologize for their own ineffectiveness with alcoholics. This humility, for sure, too much of it perhaps. Then when it comes to patience, tolerance, they are at the best. Of course, they learn that although sober, we A's can sometimes be grandiose and champion rationalizers. Really? We can be careless and irresponsible. No, not us. They can listen blandly when we tell by inference what a superior society we have. Once in a while, they hear experiences language at a meeting that would make practically anybody blush, but they never say a word or bat an eye. They take a nonsense side of the AA stride. Sometimes the patience of Job, they know they are trying to grow up and they want to help. They're stirring around the clock. This stirring around the clock, the demonstration by our friends of religion has set many of us thinking, when we consider all the priests and the preachers that have done for us, what we shall ever done for them. This is a good question indeed. Though the policy is strictly AA business, we can't help but to report priests and ministers have done for many of us. Personally, some AAs say, I don't need religion because AA is my religion. As a matter of fact, I used to take this tack myself. After enjoying a simple and comfortable view of this for some years, I finally woke up to the probability that there might be some sources of spiritual teaching, wisdom, and assurance outside of AA. I recalled that preacher Sam probably had a lot to do with that vital experience that was my first gift of faith. He had also taught me principles by which I could survive and carry on. AA also provided me with a spiritual home and climate wherein I could welcome and could do useful work. This was fine, all to the good. Yet finally I discovered I needed more than this. Quite rightly, AA didn't answer all of my questions, however important they seemed to be. Like any other adolescent, I had begun to ask myself, who am I? Where did I come from? What is my purpose here? What is the real meaning of life? When the undertaker gets through with me, am I still alive or not? Where, if any place, do I go from here? Neither science or philosophy seemed to supply me with the convincing answers. Naturally, I began to shop about in other directions and still made little progress. Though still rather gun-shy about clergy and theology, I finally went back to them, the place where I'd come from. If they had been able to teach me the principles of which I could recover, then perhaps they could be able to tell me more about the growth and understanding in this belief. Though my sobriety had come easy, the growing up business hadn't. No kidding. Both emotional and spiritual growth had always been mighty difficult for me. My quest to understand myself and better to know God and His design for me became a matter of great urgency. The clergy I reflected must represent the accumulated wisdom of ages, morals, in matters moral and theological. So I began to make friends with them. this time to listen and not to argue. Oh, okay. I can happily report that these clergymen turned out to be the greatest friend, teacher, and advisor that I shall ever have to know. Throughout the years, I found in Father Ed Dowling much of the grace and understanding which I can grow, if only a little at this time. He is the finest living example of spirituality that I've ever known. Little does a lot of us know he helped Bill write the 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions. He was more or less the editor of that. Everything that Bill wrote, he had Father Dowling proof or edit it, and it was a joint combination. Father Dowling really was Bill Wilson's spiritual sponsor, if you will, or his spiritual guy. They really became like that. Unknown fact, Bill wanted to convert to Catholicism, but he didn't because of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. He thought that would be too shocking or would send the wrong message to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I called Bill Wilson a tragic hero, he took what he wanted to do in his own spiritual life, the thing that he wanted, one of the things he wanted to do the most, and put it on the side for you and I. Talking about tragic hero, that guy gave up his whole life. I mean, his whole life, because he always thought about us, meaning the people that are here and the people yet to come. And this was one of the greatest sacrifices that he made. Oh, I get it right here. That bottom word, sacrifice. But listen what he says about Father Ed Dowling. He says like that. He has often set my feet back on the path where otherwise I might have gone off on an infinite dry bender. Obviously, so God and spirituality for sobriety or sobriety, if you will, to treat it. It's characteristic that never in all these years he asked me to join his church. Therefore, with the deepest feeling I can hear cast up AA's debt to the clergy without their works for us, AA could have never been born. Wow, he's really laying it down. Isn't that cool? Every principle, nearly every principle that we use came from them. Wow, okay. Their example, their faith, their beliefs in some part we have appropriated and made our own. Almost literally, we AA owe our lives, we AA owe them our lives, our fortunes, and such salvation as we have. Surely this is an infinite death. Or death, I guess, depth. Freudian slip. All right, next one real quick here. This is the press, radio, and film. We're going to go through that once again. Now we can see because of the psychiatrists, because of the doctors, because of the clergy, and because of the press, radio, and film, we would not be here. We need to know that for our own humility and where we're at. Because if we don't know where we've been, we're not knowing where we're at. If we don't know where we're at, then we don't know where we're going. And it's so important to cooperate, not affiliate. And here's what it is real quick. And please read our history. Talks about the Cornwell Press. Obviously, that's in the printing in the big book. Talks about the Reader's Digest article. This is on page 180. And what the article brought out with Works Publishing. Then Fulton Osler, the editor of Liberty, wrote another article. A freelance writer named Morris Markley wrote that. Good review. Goes on to the third to last paragraph. It says, such the words of AA's first friends of the press. These words to save the bankrupt book and also meant the public was the first to have the view of Alcoholics Anonymous. Then obviously Markey wrote this article, Alcoholics and God, that was printed in Liberty magazine. The results were immediate, electrifying, and more than 800 urgent pleas came into Liberty's office. Then obviously he goes on the next paragraph where he talks about Eldrick Davis and the Cleveland Plain Dealer. That really put Alcoholics Anonymous on the map after that. And it says, obviously, it goes on to say, our news hawkers were not long following our Osler example. A month later, public spirited editor, Cleveland Plain Dealer, gave Eldrick Davis an assignment to cover AA and go to the limit for days on end, articles about AA and the general public and AA. Cleveland in particular were the leading feature of the Plain Dealer. Obviously, alongside these articles appeared editorial exhortations, which in effect said AA is good and it works. Come and get it. Again, the deluge, the tiny Cleveland AA group was swamped, but hardly survived. In a few months, the numbers had shot up to hundreds. Alcoholics Anonymous had started the year 1939 with less than 100 members and finished with more than 800 of them because of the press. 1940, obviously, we got another lift. The result was the Rockefeller's famous dinner, where he introduced us to his friends and held up AA for the whole world to see. And the press did a good job. Many times the newspapers, including tabloids, some things about us. The Great Wired Service carried the story worldwide. AA members jumped up to 800 over 2,000 in 12 months. Then, of course, in 1941, we know about the famous Jack Alexander article in the Saturday Evening Post, and that's when we became a national institution. Anyhow, it says Jack's piece hit the newspaper, brought in a Niagara-like flood of appeals for help. 2 years later, AA's membership stood at 10,000. The only way we got that was because of the support of the press, radio, and film at that point in time. So important because of what they did for us. We may not be here today. By telling our story to the American public, the small band of early friends had increased AA ranks by 100-fold in a short period of 4 years, had made AA a national institution and laid the foundation upon which our society has grown mightily ever since. Today, a list of AA's friends in press, radio, and television is legion. At our headquarters, we subscribe to an extensive clipping service. Every week, the massive clip sheets tell us a graphic story of what these friends have said and done. It's a never-ending and always growing stream of life-giving blood which they pump into our world arteries. While word of mouth and personal contacts have brought in many newcomers, we can never forget the most of us are unable to trace any trace of recovery back to our friends and the communication we may read or hear what we saw. Then on the next 2 pages, he goes on to talk about how Osler in the article came out. Please go ahead and finish that. I want to read the last 2 things here, and then we will be done. Yes, because we're really pushing and past the envelope. Sorry. Last 2 paragraphs on page 183. It talks about as far as the press and what we did. It says a few months before he died, talking about this Fulton Osler, who was a trustee for AA, we spent one more evening together. It was then that he told me what AA had meant to him, most humbly describing his earlier life as a time of prideful agnosticism and sophistication would have led him down to a blind alley, and how he went to relate on the example of AA had affected him, how he eventually joined the church of his choice, and how these 2 influences had inspired him to write about the Bible in the greatest story ever told. He had done for AA, and went on to say that only a fraction of what AA had done for him, non-alcoholic. These and a host of other experiences with men and women, press, radio, and film plainly tell us what their dedication has meant. In nearly every city where AA grows today, we see our friends in full communication following the footsteps of Jack Alexander and Fulton Osler. Are such couriers of goodwill. Let us everlastingly grateful. Let us always be worthy of their friendship. Last thought of the night, page 124 and 125. Man, AA is not a big business. 124 and 125. And it goes on this, and it's kind of appropriate that we're getting close to Thanksgiving. It says, Thanksgiving is coming, and with it, Tradition Week. I never felt happier. By the way, that is a lost art. You know, back in the day, Thanksgiving week used to be Tradition Week. Now you'll hear gratitude meetings, and that's not in our history. This is our history. Why has that gone away? I don't know. Anyhow, goes on to say, our traditions are set down on paper, but they were first written in our hearts, not in our heads, not on paper. For each of us knows instinctively, I think, that AA is not ours to do with as we please. Oh, okay. We're but caretakers to preserve the spiritual quality of our fellowship, to keep it whole for those who will come after us and have need of what has been so generously given to us. Really grounding us what we're here for and why we're here and what we should do with what we have. It goes on to say, we learned our lessons about money early. We feared organization lest we solidify and destroy ourselves as a movement. At the same time, we face a moral and humane obligation to make our program instantly available for those who ask it, and they came in ever increasing numbers. Yet we need of money. We have to provide services. We are resolved never to allow either money or management of our necessary affairs to obscure our spiritual aims. The same loving God whose divine wisdom has shown us If one desperate, shaking drunk, fumbling a nickel to call for help looms larger than any organization we shall ever need. At Cleveland, last July, 7,000 of us set their approval of the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. We took our destiny by the hand. Alcoholics Anonymous had grown up. 3 of those traditions, have defined the services of Alcoholics Anonymous and outline our collective responsibility for them. Management responsibility and money responsibility. Now he's giving us 3 types of responsibility. I hate when that happens. The traditions also say that our trusted servants shall never govern, that they shall always be directed accountably for those who serve. Last 2 paragraphs on that page if we can. So the hour has come when we must take these things in our own keeping. We ask if you guard them well, for the future of Alcoholics Anonymous may depend on how you maintain and support these life-giving aims of service. Anticipating you will be happily accept the new responsibility of the trustees, Dr. Bob and I propose the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous, a body, a state of provincial representatives who will sit yearly with our foundation trustees as their traditional guide. We have long considered and will present a detailed plan designed to bring the great change about. Alcoholics Anonymous has come of age. It is a great Thanksgiving. And the reason I like to close up with that is that kind of sets the tone, if you will. Now with the tradition 6, what we have in 7, 8, 9, and then we get obviously in tradition 10 that we got from the Washingtonians. I thank you for your extra time. I'm sorry it's run over, but there was a lot to cover tonight. We'll see you next week. I'm a real alcoholic, the hopeless variety. My name's Harmon. It's good to see everybody tonight, and where we're at tonight is the language of the heart. We're going to say experience now, and somebody said instead of nuts in the wintertime, we can be a nut, and that's not using the tradition, so we'll see about that. So I don't know. It would be a fall nut in winter nuts. So anyhow, where we're at, how about if we go ahead and go to the quiet place and we'll pray our serenity prayer from the heart, from where we need to get it to get what we need to get if we can. We'll go to the quiet place, then pray our prayer, please. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I think there's a few people here for the first time. We got schedules. We'll go ahead and pass those around. We're pretty simple. We do not meet Thanksgiving Eve because some people are traveling, like myself. We'll be going down to Columbus for that weekend. Actually, we're going to be in Columbus all next month on the weekend. Long story, we won't go with that. But anyhow, it's pretty simple. Lord willing, we'll only have one Wednesday off, and that would be that 22nd, I believe. Is that what that says there? So, Lord willing, we won't deviate from that. And what we've been doing is going through this book, Language of the Heart, in Bill's articles, some of them, and we try to go through as many as we can with the time allotted to get what Bill's trying to get across, and it's really been quite a lightning thing. And we have coined this, that we have 3 pertinent ideas with the traditions: unity, primary purpose, responsibility, and any and all of them have all of these in here, some more notably than the others, but they're all interwoven. And obviously the first tradition talks about unity, and all the traditions ask us for these 2 big concepts in recovery: humility and sacrifice, especially the 12th tradition when we get there. And humility, we find out that it's not something that you grow into, you grow down. And we've coined it, a good way of doing it is to be cut down to the right size with yourself, with your fellow man, and most importantly, Almighty God. And obviously we know the 12 steps and the 12 traditions are so interwoven together for recovery that if you use these, live these, take these, and yeah, you can't help but to get what Bill was talking about. And we talk about, in the beginning, he was talking about these traditions were for relations, and relations with the individual with himself, or herself, if you will. Obviously, you got to be right with that to be able to get into a group and have your healthy relations with a group. Then we talk about the group's relations to Alcoholics Anonymous, and then as important, or more importantly, the relationship of Alcoholics Anonymous to society as a whole. And when we get to that tradition, Alcoholics Anonymous should not be anonymous. The members should be. And we will make that exactly clear on how and why that is. And anyhow, we talked about the three relations we talked about, and then last week, ironically, it was plus one. It was the relationship with money. Speaking of which, we're going around right there. Isn't that funny how that works, huh? Is that odd or is that God? Okay, and that's what we're talking about tonight is money. So anyhow, we have some novel concepts up here at AA Group, and obviously we have pamphlets that specify that. A group of AAs, difference between an AA meeting, a meeting of AAs, and special purpose groups, and most importantly, I think, is what we talked about, unity or tradition one, and then the rest of the traditions are things that we don't do to ensure that. And we find out, ironically, that so many times that these traditions, you can't talk about one without talking about so many of them, and tonight would be no different than that. Anyhow, he broke down to unity to some different terms, or if you will, some words to clarify it: substantial unity, essential unity, powerful unity, perfect unity, and wonderful unity. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So, with that being said, obviously we like to go with a few things that Bill wrote about the traditions, and he called these a design of construction for survival. And there is no guesswork what Bill thought about, and what's amazing while I'm thinking about it is be aware of the dates that he wrote these things. Most of them are written in the mid to late 40s, and if you would put your thumb over that, you would have sworn he wrote it last night, last week, last year, and certainly that not that long ago. And the reason that is all great spiritual writings, I'm going to go ahead and say it again, all great spiritual writings are timeless. And certainly this is timeless, and we know the big book is timeless, and that big book, or the good book, is timeless because it's past the test of time, if you will. And he cautions us, obviously, AA is a communion of sinners, not saints. We're brothers not in virtue, but in defects. And we talked about this, that the 12 traditions work not because we're better people, but because we are weaker people. And obviously, Bill said implicit through the 12 traditions is confession that our fellowship has its sins. We admit we have character defects as a society and that these defects threaten us continually. And once again, AA works not because of us, not because of us, in spite of us, and certainly we want to give the credit where the credit is due. And Bill went on to say this, that obviously he reminds us we are people who could not exist at all except for the grace of God. And we've talked about these traditions as they are truths. And they are experience, which is history, which is undebatable. It's not a philosophy. It's not an idea. It's not a theory. It is our experience. And all we have to do is follow the blood, sweat, and tears, and the lives lost, and the groups closed, and the headache and heartache that has been our experience. And also, we've established in the point of time for reference from 1935 to the year 2017, we are not even a blink of an eye in this time span. And so many people think Alcoholics Anonymous is on autopilot, and you might want to revisit that because, like I said, in that time span is nothing in the grand scheme of time, and it's going to be something we're going to have to take to heart to continue this thing. And we've established that obviously the first step to wellness is when we come into Alcoholics Anonymous. AA doesn't need change. We don't change AA to us. We change ourselves to AA. I will not get better. I will get sicker if I try to change Alcoholics Anonymous to me. And then obviously we find out that it is something that we willingly and wantingly to do. And it would be rather brash of me, insulting or whatever, if I went into somebody's house and rearranged their furniture to my liking. That isn't my house, it's their house, and they got it the way it's set up. It's real simple. If I'm a guest and I go somewhere and they ask me to do something out of dignity and respect for myself, Almighty God, and certainly the people that are there, I would abide by those rules or those requests, or else I wouldn't go in. Alcoholics Anonymous is no different. In fact, it should be on the other end of the spectrum. Anyhow, Bill goes on to say this: the 12 points of tradition are little else than the specific application of the spirit of the 12 steps of recovery to our group life and to our relations with society in general. The recovery steps would make each individual AA whole with one and with God. The 12 points of tradition make us one with each other and one with the world about us. Unity is our aim. Our AA traditions are, we trust, securely anchored in those wise precepts of charity, gratitude, and humility, nor have we forgotten prudence. May these virtues ever stand clear before us in our meditations. May Alcoholics Anonymous serve God in happy unison for as long as He may need us. And it's pretty powerful. And Bill said, both the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, quote, were these principles designed for ego reduction. And like I said, these 12 traditions take us from anonymity to humility and everything in between. So, with that being said, Bill also wrote this, and we like to start with this. It's called The Language of the Heart. And he said, why at this particular point in history has God chosen to communicate His healing grace to so many of us? Every aspect of this global unfoldment can be related to a single crucial word. The word is communication. There has been life-saving communication among us, with the world around us, and with God. And from the beginning, communication in AA has been no ordinary transmission of helpful ideas and attitudes. Because of our kinship in suffering and because of our common means of deliverance, are effective for ourselves only when constantly carried to others. Our channels of contact have always been charged with the language of the heart. So the word on the street is today communication. So how's that? So we've talked about, and if you weren't with us, we have what's called the short form and the long form of the traditions. A little bit of history, if you weren't with us, that the short form of the traditions was written by Earl Treat in 1947, the guy who started AA in Chicago. And the reason that him and Bill pared down the long form of the traditions is they didn't want to take too much time in the meeting, so they reduced them to the short form. Little do they know that most groups aren't even reading the short form anymore, so I don't know. That's just the history of where we're at, and I'll speak for Northeast Ohio. Actually, I had a fascinating thing last night, and it was the only one group that I know that actually talks about the concepts. And they asked me to bring concept 10, and what an enlightening thing that is. If you want to find out how sober you are, get the service manual and try to read that. Any insomniacs in here, I guarantee you, don't take sleeping pills, don't take any NyQuil, don't whatever. Read that thing and it will put you to sleep, I promise you. In a quick amount of time, and you will stay asleep too. Because if you've got to wake up and read that damn thing, you'll stay asleep. Do yourself a favor when we get there. I don't know, one of these years maybe we'll do the concepts. In fact, I've toyed around with them. I've got a couple presentations, and it's really light, because that is dry. But little did I know in the study of that that obviously, that being the third legacy of our triangle, if you have a three-legged stool, and Bill used this, if you only have two legs on that stool and you sit on it, most likely you're going to end up on your ass. I went ahead and said it. And obviously, if you have a three-legged stool and you only have one leg on it, recovery of the 12 steps, I guarantee you. So we need all three legs of that stool if we're going to be on a firm foundation. And it's absolutely fascinating. And there again, Justin, I don't know how many that is, but the history behind them and how they developed or evolved. And what's so weird about it is the study of the traditions. I'm not up here selling the concepts, but the traditions actually set the table, if you will, for the concepts, and most of the concepts relate directly back to the traditions. And what it is they keep the mistakes of the fellowship and what we've done and haven't done right in front of us, because if not, then guess what? We will repeat them over and over and over and over again. And most importantly, cannot know where I'm at today unless I know where I've been. That's what the value of this book is. And I can't know where I'm going to be at tomorrow unless I know where I'm at today. So the study, the understanding, the embracing, the living of our history is vital. Life and death for the very preservation of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is not an option. And I'm thoroughly convinced about that. And girls, don't take this too personally when I say that, but you know what history is, don't you? And they get where it's his story, in other words, God. And if your God is gender, the other side, then it would be her story, his story, her story. It doesn't matter. It's our story, but it's important that we keep our story what it is and keep the urban legend, the folklore, or you might be surprised about this. There's a lot of fake news in AA. A lot of fake news. And that was long before the election. So a lot of fake news in AA. You got to watch out now. Come on. Yeah, a lot of fake news. So I'm glad everybody's in a good mood. So number 7, lucky number 7. Here's the short form. Every AA group, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, every AA group. Who's got it? The pamphlet back there, Bob? We got that pamphlet. I left it at home. Ought to be fully. Not some, not most, not quite a bit. Fully self-supporting. Declining outside contributions. That's the short form. So that means exactly what it is. That sounds almost too simple. Let's see what the long form says. The AA groups, now he's taking a plural, themselves ought to be fully supported by the voluntary contribution of their own members. Tradition 3 is snuck in there, by our own members. So no matter how nice it is at an open AA meeting, we should respectfully ask guests, if you're not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, please don't contribute, because we're supposed to be fully self-supporting by our members. And since you are not alcoholic, you cannot be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You can be a guest, but please don't contribute, because we're violating our own tradition. It goes on to say, we think that each group should achieve this ideal, that any public solicitation of funds using the name of Alcoholics Anonymous is highly dangerous, whether by groups, clubs, hospitals, or other outside agencies. That acceptance of large gifts of any sources or contribution carrying any obligation whatever is unwise. Look at how much more ground we're carrying in the long form. Now, I'll let you guys decide. Maybe the short form is done, I'm not going to say it's maybe created more confusion than solved. In the long form, it's imperative that I get all the information. And it goes on to say, then too, we view with much concern those AA treasuries which continue beyond prudent reserves. Okay, as a nonprofit 501c3 thing, I know what a prudent reserve is. A prudent reserve normally is 3 to 6 months operating capital. So in your group, if you want to establish a prudent reserve, which I highly recommend, figure out what your coffee, donuts, whatever your deal is to crack your nut, the rent, whatever your paid is, figure it out at least for 3 months. I suggest maybe 6, and you have that in your treasury because you don't know if your group is going to go through lean times and then all of a sudden you don't have money to pay for it. That's what's called a prudent reserve. Okay. If you have any more than that, then they suggest, and we will get to that, we will close with that, what to do with your excess money as a group. Okay. Anyhow, it goes on to say, to accumulate funds for no stated AA purpose. Experience, he's really dropping it in us now, has often warned us that nothing can surely destroy our spiritual heritage as futile disputes over property, that was tradition 6, money, 7 and 7, and authority, tradition 2. So you can see the long form of tradition 7 covers about every tradition before that. And that is fascinating, isn't it, Justin? It actually is. I'm going to go ahead and read it without breaking up. Listen. I'm going to read them both again real quick. Listen to the difference. Number 7, the short form. Every A group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. Let's see what it really says in the long form. The AA groups themselves ought to be fully self-supported by voluntary contribution of their own members. We think that each group should achieve this ideal, that any public solicitation of funds using the name of Alcoholics Anonymous is highly dangerous, whether by groups, clubs, hospitals, or other outside agencies, that the acceptance of large gifts from any source or of contributions carrying any obligation whatever is unwise. Then, too, we think with much concern those AA treasuries which continue beyond prudent reserves to accumulate funds for no stated AA purpose. Experience has often warned us that nothing can surely destroy our spiritual heritage as futile disputes over property, money, and authority. And that is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, with that being said, I always like to start with this too. The 12 traditions are often referred to as why it works. They ensure the continuance of AA as a whole by providing guidelines to groups to evaluate their activities and actions. In a practical vein, they are individually and collectively humility builders for the group. They ask the group to consider its conduct for a broader perspective and, when necessary, give up something for the overall good of AA. The traditions contain spiritual principles. These principles, when applied in our lives, complement the steps as a guide to personal recovery. Number 7, we too should be fully self-supporting through own contributions. Not only is it a responsibility of sobriety, it's essential for our self-esteem. And I believe in my own personal life that my wife should be fully self-supporting through her own contributions too. So yeah, if you want to start a philosophical difference about that, go ahead and bring that one home. So yeah, someday I want to be a real go-getter. I want to retire and I want to drop her off at work and go get her when she's done. So that's my goal. So now our history is rich on this. Pardon the pun. We know in Alcoholics Anonymous we have a solemn oath to poverty. Oddly enough, is that odd or God? It came from the richest man in the world at that time, a guy named Nelson Rockefeller. Bill, through his brother-in-law, got to be involved with the board members of the Rockefeller Foundation. Bill had great visions of the future, chain of hospitals to go around the world. Dr. Bob was going to run those. Chain of missionaries to go around the world. Bill was going to see in charge of those. And they were going to write a book. And they decided that at Palisades 676, right down the street down there. There were 18 people there that changed our history. Bill thought the answer was in money, 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 money. You know, he came from New York, the stock exchange, and so on and so forth, and he thought that was all the answers. So he went to Rockefeller and these guys and wheeled and dealed, and several times went to them and wanted money. Oddly enough, Rockefeller saw that this group called Alcoholics Anonymous reminded him of first century Christianity. He said, I'm strangely stirred by all this. And he says, but money will spoil this thing. The nature of it is it's done one person helping another. And he turned us down. He gave Bill and Dr. Bob some money. And by the way, I think we're the only ones, Alcoholics Anonymous, that paid the Rockefeller Foundation back. We've got copies of the canceled check. And I mean, they would give it out. I mean, they had enough money to burn every mule in this country. That's how much money Rockefeller had. But he was good. He shared it with so many different people. But how did he know? How did God use him? And we took that vote, that oath of poverty, and even to this day. Now, that's absolutely fascinating. But more important than that, somebody would call that a slender thread, and I call that an invisible thread, because how did he know that? And here, had we gotten what we wanted, we would have crashed and burned, Alcoholics Anonymous. We would not be who we are today. And through that thing of going backwards, remember the paradoxes of the alcoholic and alcoholism, the paradoxes of Alcoholics Anonymous where things are backwards. What Rockefeller gave us that we didn't know at that time turned out to be more important than money ever could or would be. What he gave us was his name and his name of support. And you know what? That was priceless, and that you couldn't buy that. When he spoke, it was like that old E.F. Hutton commercial. People listened. And I mean, he listened. And after they turned him down, Bill said, he walked out, and let's see, who was there? It was like Carnegie, J.C. Penney, all the people that were underneath Rockefeller in the pecking order of millions and billions and so on and so forth. And when they walked out the room and we got Jack nothing, Bill said he was sat in the seats where all these millions were, and he was crushed, absolutely crushed. He thought that was the end of the deal. Little do we know that was the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous, and what he gave us, like I said, Rockefeller is absolutely priceless, and it's a story in itself. So we'll go and talk about what Bill wrote about this money thing, and we will close up with something that I really want to read, make sure that everybody knows and clarification about that. So let's see, Seventh Tradition, page 85 and 86. And oddly enough, it's called Tradition 7. Look at this date, June of 1948. And he goes on, and I love how he gives us how he's done with all of these. He relates these traditions to us individually on a personal level that we recognize, and he does this from the beginning. He goes, our growth continuing, the combined income of Alcoholics Anonymous members will soon reach an astounding total of $250 million yearly. Now, if you have an inflation thing from there to now, it's a whole lot more. And it says, this is a direct result of AA membership. Sober we have it, drunk we did not. So then obviously he's going to say, obviously your sobriety is going to be reflective in the physical world, and money is the physical world. We're not talking about just the flesh on your body and your condition. The physical world is the 3D: cars, houses, jobs, motorcycles, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever you got in the physical world. That's the physical world. He says, by contrast, our overall AA expenses are trifling. For instance, the AA General Service Office now costs us $1.50 a member per year. As a fact, the New York office asks the groups for this sum twice a year because not all of them contribute. Oh, really? So that is not a new phenomena in the year 2000. In 1948, we had some groups that weren't coming off of it. And it says, obviously, even so, the sum per member is exceedingly small. If an AA happens to live in a large metropolitan center where an intergroup office is absolutely essential to handle heavy inquiries, hospital arrangements, he contributes, or probably should contribute, about $5 annually. To pay the rent of his own group, a meeting place, maybe a coffee and donuts, he might drop in $25 a year in the hat. Or if he belongs to a club, it could be $50. In cases he takes the A grapevine, he squanders an extra $2.50. So it says, now, so the A member who meets his group's responsibilities, we're talking about the R word in the seventh tradition, okay? In the group's responsibility, finds himself liable for about $5 a month on the average. Yet his own personal income may be anywhere from $200 and $2,000 a month, the direct result of not drinking. But, and we know anything after but is BS, right? Okay, come on, y'all. I cleaned it up. But some will contend our friends will want to give us money to furnish the new clubhouse. We are a small group. Most of us are still pretty broke. What then? And he goes on to say, I am sure that myriads of AA voices, and a myriad is a great amount or infinitely great number, and sometimes it starts at 10,000. So he's saying they have a lot of AA voices, would now answer the new group saying, yes, we know just how you feel. We once solicited money ourselves. We even solicited publicly. We thought we could do a lot of good with other people's money. I'm good at spending other people's money, man. Isn't that great? Yeah, but boy, when it comes to our money, all of a sudden, I've never seen a group get sobered up and their wallets and purses are, oh my God. You can't get in there, can you? Okay. Now, yeah, it goes like this. But we found that kind of money was too hot to handle. What kind of money was he talking about? The money that we solicit from outside. And he goes on to say, besides, it set a precedent which has tempted many people to use the valuable name of Alcoholics Anonymous for other than AA purposes. We've established there is only one purpose, singleness of purpose. So what else would we possibly do? Now listen what he just said. The valuable name of Alcoholics Anonymous. Individually and group-wise, is that what we're doing for Alcoholics Anonymous? Is it a valuable name? I've had some people say, if that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is, I won't fill out the rest of but it's not too endearing. If that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. Now we all, individually and as a group, are examples of AA. It's either a good example or a bad example. So, the valuable name of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, priceless in itself. Okay? And it says, while there may be little harm in a small friendly loan, which your group really means to repay, we really beg of you to think hard before you ask a willing friend to make a large donation. You can and you will soon pay your own way. For each of these overhead expenses will never amount to more than a price of a good bottle of whiskey a month. You will be everlastingly thankful if you pay this small obligation yourselves. When reflecting on these things, why should not each of us tell himself, yes, we AAs were once a burden on everybody. We were takers. Now that we are sober by the grace of God and have become responsible citizens of the world, why shouldn't we about face and become thankful givers? Yes, it's high time we did. How much is your life worth? How much is your physical sobriety worth? How much is your recovery worth? And obviously, you know, it is priceless. And my experience on that is the more I give, the more I get, the more I owe. And I'm not just talking dollars and cents, tradition 7. I'm talking about time, energy, effort, kindness, patience, tolerance, all the things that are talked about in our literature that makes a recovered alcoholic. And we know in all things, there is no free lunch. You don't always get what you pay for, but you will pay for what you get. Some of it called karma. You reap what you sow. And we're not talking about after you die. We're talking about right here and right now. The other book talks about that. What you send out is what you get back. And obviously, this is a small but a big part of what this thing called recovery from alcoholism is. So, on 93, let's see what he says about this. 93, about middle of the page, it says Tradition 7. 93, middle of the page, Tradition 7, states that we had best pay our own bills, that large contribution of those carrying obligations ought not to be received, that public solicitation using Alcoholics Anonymous is positively dangerous. Obviously, if we took any money, any large sum from anybody outside, what you do is you've exposed yourself and put yourself in a position of obligation to him, her, or whatever group gave you the money. They say there's no hook in there, but as soon as they give you that, then they'll start telling you how you ought to run your group, who you ought to let in, what you ought to say, don't say, the time, so on and so forth. And guess what? Then you're in trouble, and then, believe it or not, people using the name of Alcoholics Anonymous for their own good. I know that doesn't happen, but it happens every day in a lot of different ways and not a good way. So, let's see what it says on page 72. It's pretty cool on old page 72 here, and what we're talking on that one is, and by the way, my bad, if you don't have a book, I think we have them back there for loan or for purchase back there. Please make sure that you do pay for it, because we've had a epidemic of books coming up without being paid for. So anyhow, on page 72, obviously it says on the second paragraph where it says, Tradition 7 states, page 72, Tradition 7 states, after declaring for full financial support as soon as possible, quote, that any public solicitations of funds using the name Alcoholics Anonymous is highly dangerous, whether by groups, clubs, hospitals, or other outside agencies. That acceptance of large gifts from any source or any contributions carrying any obligation whatever is unwise. That we view with concern those AA's treasuries which continue beyond prudent reserves to accumulate funds for no stated purpose. That nothing can surely destroy, powerful words there, destroy our spiritual heritage. Isn't that cool? As futile disputes over property, money, and personal authority. Being clear on these basic principles, it is suggested that 4 of these articles in this book be carefully read. You might want to do this at your convenience. Page 24, 46, 51, and 43. The ones on money, clubs, hospitals, and outside enterprises, which show our past experiences, history, undebatable, it is what it is, not a theory, not an idea, not a philosophy, in these fields. They clearly reveal the fundamentals of money management tradition. Well, I've never seen a group of people worse with money than alcoholics. Oh my God. Money management, okay? And in general way, they quite clearly indicate what the corporate status of any useful or related enterprise ought to be. So I obviously get it. That is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So now when he goes on to say this on page 218 to 221, respecting money. And what's so weird about this article, we'll try to go in between. He can't write about tradition 7 without bringing in 8, but come back next week and we'll read the stuff on 8. Here's what it is. Respecting money, November 1957. Here in the States, it's Thanksgiving time. The whole of AA takes its cue from this occasional that we rejoice worldwide in gratitude for the blessings that our fellowship has bestowed on us. In its traditional too, that is a season for taking stock of our progress as a fellowship. We look at our society and ask, how are we doing? AA 12 traditions are the measuring rods that we use. Whoa-oh! You just changed what the 12 traditions are. It's a inventory process of how well we are doing. He threw that one in. Uh-oh. Measuring rods. How well are we sticking to 12 traditions? Is the prime question each Thanksgiving week. I don't think I've ever heard in the week of Thanksgiving in 30 years a group or Alcoholics Anonymous ever talk about that. It just said that's what we're supposed to do. Novel thought. Maybe at a discussion meeting, so I said it, maybe that would be the topic on there. Please take your conference-approved literature in there so they don't throw you out, okay? Yeah, controversial to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous in certain meetings. And if you're not careful, they won't know what you're talking about. They may think that you have come from Mars, but here it is right here, conference approved. Okay, it goes on to say, every year we see more clearly that adherents that are hard won. Uh-oh, wait a minute. That means if it's hard won, that means there was a battle, and that was some type of fight. I talked about that earlier. Yeah, the battle's has been paid with blood, sweat, tears, deaths, literally, figuratively, hard fought. We don't have to fight them anymore. It's already been, the battle's over with. Y'all, okay? Y'all, okay, yeah. Okay, hard-won traditional principles is the basis for our unity. Uh-oh, so now he just got done saying the 12 traditions not only are the measuring rods, but they are principles are the basis of our unity and the effective carrying of our message. 3 things. You might want to write this down if somebody asks you what the principles are. Okay, measuring rods. Okay. Basis for unity and the effective of carrying our message. So that tells me if I don't have these, then I can't really do what it says in chapter 7, working with others. That's not what I said, what it just says right here. Okay? That the indifference, a lot of that going on, okay? Lack of understanding, maybe more than that, or rebellion against these principles, 12 traditions, could result in widespread dissension and maybe ruin. Wow. That's a lot of power in here, what we're talking about. Not only dissension, but it may be the end of us. Not what I say, what he says, okay? And it goes on to say, obviously, we keenly realize that the practice of the 12 traditions, first time he said the practice, we always say practice these principles, the 12 steps in all our affairs, now he's telling us, practice the traditions. See, they are like this. They are together, not separate, okay? Quite as vital, that is life and death, the life of AA as a whole, as is the practice of the 12 steps to the life of sobriety of each member. So, 12 steps, vital to our individual life, 12 traditions, vital to our other life. Matter of life and death. A lot of power in there. The Grapevine has asked me to write about the traditions issue. Accordingly, I've selected those which are often misunderstood and sometimes unpopular topic of money. And I love what he does now. Its use and misuse. Stop right there if we can. That's what alcoholism is about. When we make that decision in the third step to turn our will and our life over the care and direction of God, and when we inventory our resentments, our fears, our guilt, shame, and remorse with the sex, conduct, and harms done to others, what is he talking about? That's the misuse of our instincts. Now he's just talking about the misuse of our money. See how it is from the steps to the traditions? It's right there. I didn't know how to use those instincts, so I misused them. I don't know how to use my money, so I'm going to misuse my money. It's real simple. Do I own my own money, or does my money own me? We hear so many times the love of money is the root of all evil. Our money is the root of all evil. That's not true. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. There's a big difference between the two. It's not the money, it's the love. And you ask somebody, the more you have, the more you want, and guess what? It's never, ever enough. Ask the millionaire, because he's not a billionaire. Ask the billionaire, he's not a zillionaire, or whatever such it is. So it goes on to say, about this, our tradition makes short and simple declarations. In tradition 7, we read, every group ought to be fully self-supporting to sign outside contributions. One more time, I'm going to read what he said and what he cautioned about us. Warned us about indifference, lack of understanding, rebellion, what is it equal to? Widespread dissension, ruin, and obviously we know that we are talking about it's our measuring rods. And obviously, they are the basis for unity and the effective carrying the message. So, I mean, it's just, what can you say to that? And it's all respecting money here, so. I get it. Page 219, second paragraph, obviously, it says about the Words Pack Immense meeting. They are the outcome of huge controversies and struggles of our pioneering time when we knew that A would have to come up with a sound and workable money policy or else fade endless effectiveness and possible collapse. God, it's more important than ever before. Listen to what he just said. That's why we better follow what we got. Ineffectiveness and possible collapse. Okay. If ever a matter was taken seriously, it was a question of money. The money debates at that time veered crazily between two extreme poles of opinion. The conservatives said that AA should have no use of money at all. Skip down the next paragraph. At the other extreme, we have radicals and promoters that said we had to have vast sums. And we know, obviously, if you get a chance to read that, time doesn't permit to go in that. And the premise of the 12 concepts was Bill's, the word C, not the communication that we talked about in the 12 traditions or the language of the heart. It was the word of compromise. Dr. Bob and Bill taught us to disagree agreeably, but there is always a common ground. And what's common ground is what is best for Alcoholics Anonymous? What is best for God? What is best for the new man coming in? If we keep those three things first and foremost, Bill used to call it a 10 strike. It's like when you're bowling and you get a strike. If we veer off from any of those three questions, then we're screwed. I said it. And then tradition one is lost with the lack of unity. Okay, and then it goes on to the second last paragraph. It says, today we can see that conservatives would have rotted us by doing nothing. On the other hand, the promoters would have surely ruined us by trying to do everything. The process of separating the sense and the nonsense, don't you just love him? Use, mislose, sense, nonsense, beautiful, was long and painful. We were vastly confused because nobody had any monopoly on any good sense. I love it. Isn't that great? Sense, nonsense, and good sense. Isn't he beautiful? Next page on there, 220. Obviously, he goes on to say, the second paragraph, slowly the hammers of promoters beat on the stubborn anvils of the conservatives. Our two money traditions were fashioned. Next to, or the rest of that page is Tradition 8, which we'll get next week on page 221 if we can. It will sum up on the seventh tradition. But the conservatives also had their victory when we finally took the decision to build a dike against the inrush of contributions from the world outside. We began to decline all, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, all such gifts, large and small. Our service centers would never wax rich from the contribution of AA members, but our well-meaning friends by gift and bequest could now endow us with huge funds. Once we began to accept donations of this kind, there would be no end. Though easily able to pay for our small service bills, we would nevertheless begin to accept huge amounts of charity. Worse still, rich AA service boards would embark on all sorts of needless and compromising adventures. A large paid bureaucracy would certainly take shape, and the worst fears of the conservatives would be realized. Respecting gifts and grants, their wisdom had been supremely right. Thus, we developed Tradition 7, quote, every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting and signing outside contributions. So now you can see how it was trial and error, the right and left, they came right in the middle. Not long after this tradition was written, AA's trustees turned down a bequest of $10,000 at a moment when money was badly needed. It was a time when by considerable margin the AA groups were failing to support their own world headquarters. Nevertheless, our trustees promptly plugged that first threatened leak into our newly constructed dike against the temptation to take money from outside AA. Thereafter, AA would pay for its services to do without them. That decision still stirs me. It was one of the great turning points in our history. I'm going to go ahead and read that again. It was one of the great turning points in our history. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. To conclude, our spiritual way of life. Now, he didn't say a way of not drinking. He didn't say a way of not reading, talking, theorizing, philosophy. Our way of life, spiritual way of life. Not religious, spiritual. And obviously it goes back to the big book thing we'll talk about. Is safe for future generations if, that qualifying word, one of the most powerful words in the English language. If you do this, you'll get that. If you don't, you won't. Half of the word life in the middle of it is the word if. And he says, if we do this, listen what will happen, okay? If as a society we resist the temptation to receive money from the outside world, but that leaves us with, responsibility. Come on, y'all. Responsibility, one that every, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, every member ought to understand. And this is it. Our groups, our areas, and AA as a whole, that's all the way up and all the way down, will not function unless our service centers are sufficient and their bills are paid. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, money and spirituality do mix. This whole thing started on that. When Ebby went to Bill, he had to make a phone call that cost money. When Ebby went to Bill, he had to get on the subway to go over to see Bill. Obviously, when Bill got into Towns Hospital, that costs money to find spiritual. Spirituality and money do mix, especially in the basket when it goes around here. We need to pay our own way. Absolutely, positively. So he goes on to say, obviously, we cannot skimp when the treasurer of a group passes the hat. Our groups, our areas, and AA as a whole will not function unless our service centers are sufficient and their bills are paid. When we meet and defeat the temptation to take large gifts, we are only being prudent. It's a beautiful word. Remember, we talked about it earlier. Okay? But when we are generous with a hat, that we give a token that we are grateful for our blessings and evidence that we are eager to share what we have found with all those who still suffer. And he brings it back to that beautiful point of, obviously, we need to be self-supporting so we can carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Okay, that is beautiful on there. Now, he talks about safe use of money. On page 24 through 26. Safe use of money. Note the date on this one, May of 1946. In Alcoholics Anonymous, does money make the mare go, or is it the root of all evil? We are in the process of solving that riddle. Nobody pretends to have the complete answer. Where the proper use, remember misuse, use, okay? Proper use of money ends, and the misuse begins. It's the point of spiritual space we are all seeking. Like I said, do you own your own money, or does your money own you? Everyone is asking, what shall be our attitude for voluntary contributions, paid workers, professionalism, and outside donations? See what he just said there? He's getting ready to just till the soil for Tradition 8 next week about paid workers and professionalism. Anyhow, it goes on to say, in the first years of AA, we had no money problems. We met in homes where our wives made sandwiches and coffee. If an individual AA wished to grub a steak for a fellow alcoholic, he did so. It was purely his own affair. We had no group funds, hence no group money troubles. And it must be recorded that many an old-timer AA wishes to know how to return the early days of halcyon simplicity. That is calm, nostalgic. There's a lot of halcyon seekers in this room, I know right now, okay? Knowing that the quarrels over material things have crushed the spirit of many good undertaking, it is often thought that too much money may prove an evil for us too. Once again, money isn't the root of all evil. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. Doesn't he bring it to home what he's talking about? How important it is. It's a matter of life and death, and he always brings it back to the spiritual. How too much of the material will and does ruin the spiritual. It's small use earning for the impossible. Money has entered our picture, squiggly writing in south size. We are definitely committed to sparingly use. No one of us would seriously think of abolishing our meeting places for clubs for the sake of avoiding money altogether. Experience has shown us we very much need these facilities, so we must accept whatever risk there is in them. But how shall we keep these risks to a minimum? How shall we traditions, limit the use of money so it will never topple the spiritual foundation? Isn't that beautiful? Upon which each AA life so completely depends. Once again, it's a matter of our survival, individually and collectively. That is a real problem today. So let us look together at the main phases of our financial situation, seeking to discover what is essential, what is not essential, what is legitimate and harmless, and what may be dangerously unnecessary. Isn't that beautiful? So now he makes a statement, and he's going to go and explain it. Suppose we begin with voluntary contributions, and he talks about paying the rent, maintenance, and services in the next paragraph. And it says, the last three sentences, it says, we're only too glad to pledge the regular support with the full understanding, of course, that such contributions are in no wise a condition of our AA membership. These particular uses of money are now generally accepted, and with some qualifications, there's little worried about the dire long-range consequences And obviously then the next sentence he's going to talk about tradition 8, where we're talking about the professional workers and so on and so forth. Now, if we can go on to the next page, and page, that would be 26, he talks about more and more. This is in the second paragraph up the top, more and more. The AA groups are realizing they are spiritual entities, not business organizations. Therefore, if that would be the case, then we don't need a whole lot of bling to keep a spiritual entity going. And then it goes on, and a couple sentences later, support of the club then becomes an individual matter rather than the group matter. Okay, so obviously if you want to do that, that's an individual, not the group. The last couple sentences of that paragraph, it says, therefore, club support has to come mainly from those individual AAs who need or like clubs, which, by the way, is the majority, but the majority ought never try to coerce the minority into supporting clubs they do not want or need. Of course, clubs also get in a certain amount of help from meetings held in them. The second last sentence in that paragraph, it says, but strictly AA matters remain the function of surrounding groups themselves. And then obviously the next one we go on with tradition 8, and we will finish that next week. So, lack of money. Let's see what happens when we don't have any money. Page 57 through 61. Policy of gifts. I'm sorry, 28 to 32. Thank you for doing that. God almighty, thank you. I skipped that. I must be on the roll. Policy of gifts. Thank you. Once again, he intermixes 7 and 8. Thank you for catching that. June of 46. Okay. And it says, during the topic of last month's grapevine, we make the following observations. Number 1, that the use of money in AA is a matter of the gravest importance. When its ends, where its use ends and its misuse begins, is the point we should vigilantly watch. Number 2, that AA is already committed to a qualified use of money, because we would not think of abolishing our offices, meeting place, or clubs simply for the sake of avoiding finances together. 3, that our real problem today consists in settling intelligent and traditional limits upon our use of money, thus keeping its disruptive tendency at a minimum. 4, that the voluntary contributions of pledges of AA members should be our principal, and that's PAL, not PLE, and eventually our sole support. Number 5, that we have found it generally